Hi, I'm Allison Koenecke, and I'm currently doing a postdoc in the MSR New England lab. Today, I'll be talking about an application of causal machine learning to fairness, which focuses on a recent paper led by my co-author, Roxian Xiong, on federated causal inference. Now, let's start with some motivation about why federated causal inference has to do with fairness. So in the US, Asian women's breast cancer death rates are roughly half that of white American women. But that said, you can see from this chart that there is a huge amount of heterogeneity among Asian women. So for example, incidence is roughly doubled for Japanese women relative to Korean women in the US. So this means we need increased awareness, targeted cancer control, and lots more research to better understand underlying factors. So rather than aggregating all of these very different demographics into one catch-all Asian category, which is potentially inaccurate by subgroup, there are lots of situations where we'd like to study heterogeneous treatment effects for each of these very different Asian subgroups, recognizing that there's relatively little medical data collected for each subgroup alone. Right, so speaking more generally, let's say that we have two separate sets of patient data from two different sources. Each of them contains rows of patient data, where a subset are patients belonging to particular subgroups that we're studying. And we let data sets A and B be heterogeneous. So for example, one might have a higher Asian representation than the other. Now, concretely, our research question is, how can we accurately use all of the information we have in order to estimate treatment effects on subgroups of patients who do not appear frequently in our data? And so the kind of obvious solution here is for us to simply combine the data sets. This means that we'll have more data rows that correspond to patients from the smaller subgroups that we want to study. But there's a fundamental issue with doing this in many cases. You can't simply stack the data. So for example, you're not allowed to combine medical claims data from two different companies for legal and ethical reasons. So what method can we develop instead, given that we can't actually combine data rows? Well, instead we can do what we've termed federated causal inference, which doesn't require combining the data sets themselves. So for this, we calculate relevant statistics on each of our data sets separately, and then do some clever weighting to generate the overall treatment effect across both data sets. Our three federated methods also give us some nice asymptotic guarantees. And so let's take a step back and think about just doing causal inference on a single data set. We can estimate a parametric model using one of three methods listed by maximizing a weighted likelihood function. Now, why do we want to estimate these model parameters? Because once we have these parameter estimates, we can just plug them into formulas for standard causal metrics we might care about, like the average treatment effect, ATE, or the average treatment effect on the treated, ATT. Now, before we proceed to federating our estimators, we need to define some properties of our data and models. So on covariate distribution, if we have heterogeneous data sets, it'll be unstable. On propensity scores, if we're not simulating our own data, these will be unknown. Next, if at least one of the propensity or outcome models is unstable, this means that we do not have the same functional form and model parameters across individual data sets, so we need to allow parameters to be specific to each data set. And lastly, if the model has omitted covariates or incorrect functional form, then the model is misspecified. So now let's go through with how to actually federate these estimates. So let's start with our different data sets, say A and B. And next we use one of our methods, say MLE, IPW, or AIPW, to estimate the propensity or outcome model on each data set separately. Then we consider which of the binary assumptions described earlier actually holds for the relevant model. And now we get to the key part, which is how to actually federate individual models with various formulas that we provide. So this involves a bunch of components like dealing with different parameters with zero vector padding, as shown in this image. And then it involves weighting estimates with some combination of Hessian, sample size, or inverse variance weighting. And so no need to read through this thoroughly, but here's a sample table from our paper that I'll quickly flash just so you have a sense of what aforementioned step 4 looks like in terms of how different assumptions from step 3 affect the formulas for step 4 that give us the federated coefficient beta and variance V. So next is if you've done steps 2 to 4 on propensity models, now we go back and work on the outcome models. And finally, the output we get is a federated point estimate and variance that incorporates statistics from each data set separately. So the obvious question is, do these methods developments actually work? The short answer is yes. Our paper on arXiv includes robustness checks on both medical data sets and simulations. Today, I'll quickly show one example. In this particular medical application, we want to study the average treatment effect for a small group of patients in dataset A and a similar set of patients in dataset B. If we estimate the treatment effects on each of the datasets individually, we get the green and yellow point estimates, where both have a beta hat of less than 0, implying that the treatment appears to reduce mortality, the less so for individuals in dataset B. Now, with the naive inverse weighting, inverse variance weighting that one might usually do, we get a federated point estimate based on the point estimates of data sets A and B, which is the red dot, so the third row there. But this point estimate is further to the left of the green dot, so it doesn't seem like a very trustworthy combination of these two data sets. And this happens because data sets A and B are heterogeneous. Meanwhile, our federated causal method shows a point estimate between the green and yellow values, which is exactly what we expect to see if our data sets were actually combined. So overall, we suggest using federated causal inference when combining data sets if there are legal or ethical reasons they can't be combined. And this is a straightforward way to increase power for the subgroups that you're studying. And this is especially important when those subgroups have small numbers. So in closing, today we've focused on heterogeneous dataset combinations such that minority patient groups can be more accurately studied. But there are many more ways in which causal machine learning and fairness intersect, and we hope that researchers will critically engage with the fairness literature when conducting causal analyses.